Yes, friends, today we are going to talk about what is a good real estate investment and how do you differentiate between good, bad, and best. I'm not saying good, better, and best. Good, bad, and best. Why? Because it's a very sharp analysis. It's very important that you have certain tests where you can test whether that is a good investment or a bad investment. A lot of friends really ask me that, okay, I bought such and such property, what do you think? Or I am looking at a property, what do you think? Unfortunately, I may not have time to answer everyone, so I thought I record this video and I share this knowledge with you. So these are the 4 or 5 tests I have to figure out whether it is a good investment, a bad investment, our best investment. First of all, I congratulate you for thinking into this direction because I do believe real estate is one of the best investment and one of the best 401k plan. And I know lots of the people buy real estate as a passive income. It's okay, you can buy that, but I'm going to give you also some of the things you must be looking into when you do passive income management, because at the end of the day, nothing is absolutely passive because everything requires some feeding and caring because there are no free lunch. Even if you have stock market and if you have a person who's managing your stocks, you still need to manage and keep an eye on that person too. So anyway, you could do the same in real estate. But first of all, we are going to talk about what are the few critical things you must be looking at the property if you are going to buy a property and either hold it and rent it, or you are going to do fixer-upper. But today, really, I'm going to focus mainly on buying a property and renting it. So the very first test you have for the property is that does the property provide best positive cash flow? A lot of my friends tells me, oh, I buy the property and it doesn't really do a positive cash flow until I pay 70, 80, 90, 100%. That's really not a positive cash flow. So I'm going to really give you a very easy test which you can really do quickly for yourself and figure out whether that is a good or a bad or a best investment. So let's suppose you buy either a multifamily or a single family, whatever. It doesn't matter single or multi as long as it gives you the right rent and it gives you the positive cash flow. So let's say you buy a property for $1 million, and we are showing you this on the side as well so you can understand our methodology and build your own cheat sheet. So if you buy $1 million property and then let's say you pay 30% in cash, because most banks will easily give you loan for commercial property if you're putting 30% down. 20% down usually doesn't work, especially if you're new. Now, unless you have lots of properties and a lot of assets and good cash flow and all that, that's a different thing. But the safe bet would be to use 30% equity and 70% loan. So let's say you got 30% equity and you pay $300,000, and now you basically want to rent and you get 70% interest only loan or mortgage. That all really depends on you, but for the simplicity of this exercise, I'm thinking that you got interest only loan because that's the cost of money you have to pay. So if you got $1 million property, you have $700,000 loan, and then the interest nowadays, unfortunately, the interest rate is high, especially for commercial. I think with what's going on in the election, I do believe that the interest rate will come down and make a positive difference. But right now, you got to take a little bit safer bet and take 7%. If it is 7% of interest, then you got $700,000, you got $49,000 you have to pay. Now, what are the other things you have to pay before we talk about income? You have to pay, of course, taxes. Let's say the average tax rate is $20 per thousand. Now, there are towns which are about $12, $13 per thousand, but there are towns which are like $25, $30 per thousand. So I use about $20 average. So let's say that would be $20,000 a year tax. These are the two very big expenses. And then there are some other small expenses, your insurance, your maintenance, and if you are paying utilities, you got to count. Otherwise, consider you don't have to pay utilities. The biggest thing is really your tax, your maintenance, and your insurance. You have to really buy an insurance, and then you should also have the tenant by tenants insurance for their own property. So basically, your total expense comes out to be $73,400 per year. If you add up interest, if you add up your taxes, you add up your insurance and your average maintenance, I took only $200 a month maintenance. It could be less or more depending on how old the property is. I thought that when you bought up for $1 million, that does not really need any more maintenance. You need a regular maintenance, but you may not need a lot of other investment. Like you don't buy a property for $1 million and put another $500,000 in it. If you do, then you have to change your formula accordingly. So I'm assuming that you bought $1 million property, it is ready to rent, and then you got it and you rented it right away. So even if you rented right away, you could have 3 tenants, you could have 1, you could have 5 tenants, I don't know, but you cannot take 100% occupancy. The best occupancy you can take is like 90%. You're lucky if you're getting over 5-10 years, 90% occupancy. And let's say you're getting about $7,000 rent per month. That's a real actual figure, because a friend of mine, he will know when he will watch this video, that he actually gave me his actual scenario that he's buying a property for $1 million and the property is bringing in about $7,000 a month. And if you take 90% occupancy, that's what I'm advising, you multiply, you get about $75,600 a year rent. Now, you got $75,600 rent and your expenses are $73,400. So you do have a positive cash flow, but a very thin margin, $2,200 only per year. So you spend $1 million, your equity is only $300,000. So you employed $300,000 and you're getting $2,200 a year return. No, so you might say that's very, very small. Yes, it is very small, but it's a real estate because you are also sort of building your value. Now over here, I only took the example of interest only. Now you don't have to have interest only. You can have a mortgage, but if you have a mortgage, of course, your formula will change. I'm giving you only very crude analysis. Of course, you can refine it and you can figure out exact. But this is really not that crude. It's also somewhat real as well, because most of the people do, most of the investors do. When they find the property, they put up 20-30% of their pocket, they get rest from the bank, and it should really do a positive cash flow. But in this case, it is doing a positive cash flow. It's passing the test, but barely. Because if your occupancy goes slightly down, if your maintenance go a little bit higher, if your taxes go a little bit higher, your property is staying empty, or something happens, God forbid, you could be on the hole. So I think this property is really on the fence on this test. And also, by the way, it is a very low return on investment. When you take return on investment, you don't divide it by $1 million. Even though you bought the property for $1 million, but you didn't spend $1 million, you only spent $300,000. Yes, you use your leverage, but you only spend $300,000 from your pocket. So you gotta really divide your net income divided by your net equity. So that's how you get ROI. So this ROI is pretty small, as you can see. So the other test would be that people like to say that when you buy a property, if the property value is $1 million, your rent should be around 10%. So let's say if 10% of $1 million is $100,000. So it means you should be getting about $100,000 rent without subtracting anything. So that's another test. So let's say if this property had a $10,000, like $9,000 to $10,000 rent per month, then this would really pass that test very easily. So that's another way of doing test. Now, why did I say 10%? Because ideally, the good properties are 7 to 10% return, and best properties are double-digit return, and bad properties are they have actually 0 to no return, a very little return. So you can decide yourself whether that is a great opportunity. The person who presented to me said, "It's an amazing opportunity." I think it's okay. It's not the best opportunity. That was my first gut feel, and now when I did the math, the gut feel is correct. So there are 2 tests I told you. One, the cash flow test. The other test is really just the rent test, rent versus the total value. The rule of thumb is that it should be double digit at least 10%. So if the rent for $1 million property should be around $9,000-$10,000 a month, you just do 10% and then do 90% occupancy. Oh, here's another thing. If you buy a property, brand new property, it gives you less return actually. And if you buy a property in a suburban area, it gives you lesser return. If you buy it in urban, you actually get higher rent and you get higher occupancy and you get a better return. So that's another thing to remember. Then the next thing is basically another test, and that test is really how far enclosed this property is. Because at the end of the day, there are a lot of gimmicks, there are a lot of bad tenants. I mean, I just had an issue where somebody gave a very bad, actually totally fabricated cashier check. So once they give you a cashier check and you rented them the property, they have it. They have more rights than even you. So you have to get them out, and that is a cost there too. So that's the reason I said there's no free lunch. There are other issues which we will discuss later on, but when you are buying a property, yes, it is a decent investment, but it's not totally free of all risks. There are risks involved because it's your hard-earned money, and if somebody's there and not paying rent or gave you a fake check, you have not only financial burden but emotional burden too. Because if you're a doctor or if you are doing some very good job and this is your passive income and now you have to deal with this, you don't want to deal with this. So I'm not discouraging you. I actually encourage everybody to have some real estate. It's one of the best investment, good long-term investment, but you have to really have the right test. So you make sure you make a right decision so you have a margin. And then the other thing is that if you're buying multiple properties, it would be better to buy most of the properties in the same vicinity, because then it'll be easier management. And better yet, it would be best if you can buy a portion of multifamily where there are multiple units. Like let's say it's a 100-unit facility and you own 10% and you own 20 or 30%. That's better than buying 1, 2, 3 here. Now you may say that then you're adding another risk that if it's wrong, it's going to go all bad. Whereas if you have bought it at different places, at least you are amortizing your risk. Then you may have a problem one place, you don't have another. Yeah, that's true as well. But if you bought with a good company, good property that do a positive cash flow, then buying at one place is easier because now somebody else is managing for you. You don't have to deal with the tenant. You don't have to deal with all the lawsuit. You don't have to deal with lots and lots of companies. And then the last thing there today I will talk about is really make sure when you buy a property for rental or when you're doing this business, keep that separate, have a separate LLC, either separate LLC for each building or at least one LLC. I think to make things simple, I like to keep things simple. You have an LLC for all of your rental portfolio. But if you want to feel more comfortable, you can actually set up one LLC for each property. If you want to be even more protection, then you can have a C corporation and then LLCs under it. There are many, many different layers and different ways you can do it. I like to keep things simple. So I would say at least don't keep it under your name. Keep it under some sort of LLC, because LLC is like another person and then your liability is much less. So that's what I would like to share with you today, that if you are going into real estate investment, it's a great idea, but here are the few tests you must do. The first one is positive cash flow. The other one is rent amount versus the value. The other one is really proximity, how far that is. And the other one is really the management portion. And the last one is the legal and the tax portion. That when you're buying a property, there are other benefits, like you are taking a depreciation every year. There's a tax benefit, especially if you're making income. I do not believe that you have to pay 50, 60, 70, 80% before you positive cash flow. If that's what you're doing, then honestly, that's not a very good investment. So that goes into bad category. So good, bad, and best. Best would be double-digit return. Good will be single-digit return, but still it should pass other tests and be a little bit hassle-free. And worst would be what it would be. All right, until then, have a happy, healthy life. See you next time.